Hey, this is day 18 of the video challenge. This one is going to be called, Is the Horse Market in a Bubble? And that's the topic of my video today. I can't put my phone onto airplane mode because I'm on the road again and my wife's driving behind me. And so if she wants to call and get off the interstate for whatever reason, I gotta answer the phone. So if that does happen in the middle of this video, then I guess I'll have to splice it or something, figure out how to do that. Anyway, I've been listening to some podcasts from the guy named Texas Slim, who's got the Texas Beef Initiative. It's got me fired up to keep refining this channel. I know that for the most part, these videos I've been making in the 50-day video challenge have been all over the place. Talking about sling blades and the price of crude oil and driving to Arizona, what have you. And really, my goal in these 50 videos is more to get in a habit of creating content and get better at speaking into a camera and marshaling my thoughts in a coherent manner. So I'm not diving real deep so far, other than here and there, into what this channel is going to really be all about in the future, which I did make one video called the Cowboy Money Show, which is the new name of my channel. Anyway, broadly speaking, Cowboy Money Show is about the intersection of sound money or hard money economics and the Western industry, or anyone who cares about beef, eating beef, producing beef, or cares about team roping and rodeo, horseshoeing, horse market. That's not what I was born into, but my chosen milieu, which I spent the last couple of decades working into, what I care about, and what I believe is integral and important for what it means to be an American. Not that if you're an American you have to be involved in this, but if you're an American and you eat beef and you care about liberty, then this is for you. So, but I thought a good way to get into the whole economic side of it is to talk about my experience in the horse market, the racehorse business, which has been a lot of that, but also in the roping world. Get my enunciation a little better on that one, but I got on the racetrack in Chester, West Virginia in 2006. Started shoeing racehorses after having been out of horseshoeing school for about maybe 2 years, I guess. Yeah, I went in 2003 when I went to horseshoeing school. Ended up working there as a kind of an intern for 6 months, and then I ended up working for a couple different people in Texas shoeing, and then ended up by a long string of events shoeing racehorses at Mountaineer Racetrack and Casino in West Virginia. And that's another story for another day. But I was shoeing there on the track in 2006, and 2006 and 7 is when I started reading economics, and more specifically learning about the Austrian business cycle theory and what money is, how it affects everyday life, how it affects markets and stock market and housing market. And what happened was, my dad gave me a book by a man named Bill Bonner, who's a pretty big time speculator / investor, especially in the precious metals sector. He had a newsletter and a publishing company that sold still sells newsletters. I think Bill Bonner is more or less retired, but he wrote a book around that time called Empire of Debt, and it basically laid out the case for why the U.S. government is insolvent, and he kind of in broad strokes the Austrian view of the whole economic situation. It was right about that time that Congressman Ron Paul was running for congressman from Texas was running for the Republican nomination for the presidential election in 2008, and he's a doctor. He's a real upstanding, amazing character. Maybe one of the greatest politicians, in my opinion, in American history. Really, just because he was such a principled man. He was known for decades in Congress as the only no vote on so many issues that were supported, that both Republicans and Democrats got wrong, and he was always stood up for his principles, and he was truly a constitutional conservative in a way that actually had teeth. Now, that might be a losing battle, that's another video, but he was a big proponent of and he was a student of the Austrian school as well, and he had read Murray Rothbard and Ludwig von Mises and all these guys that had been at the forefront of really the whole field of economics. They had taken and built on the march. Sorry, something came up on my phone. They had taken and built on the Austrians, Karl Menger, and von Mises was an Austrian as well, I guess. But anyway, I don't want to get bogged down in the history of the Austrian school, which I'm somewhat familiar with, but I'm not the best one to talk about it. But so I read this book, The Empire of Debt by Bill Bonner, and I started watching Ron Paul videos and Peter Schiff videos, who's a big-time Austrian guy, a gold and silver investor. Some people hate him because he does not like Bitcoin. I don't know if he's right or wrong. I don't hate him. But and then also Tom Woods, who's a great popularizer of Austrian economics and a great historian and a great writer, and runs an amazing podcast called The Tom Woods Show if you're interested. So this was in 2007, and Ron Paul in the run-up to the primaries was in the Republican debates was basically calling the housing bubble before it crashed, and he was saying, exactly, he was predicting what was going to happen in real time for those previous 3-4 years. I think he was kind of shouting that from the rooftops, and nobody really believed him, which is often the case with anyone alerting the general public to the fact that there's big trouble ahead. No one wants to hear that from a politician. But he was right, and the housing bubble did collapse, did crash, and the S&P 500 fell, whatever, 40 or 50%, and there was great carnage, and Congress passed the Troubled Asset Relief Program, known as TARP, and a bunch of bailouts, and they bailed out Goldman Sachs, and I think Morgan Stanley, or no, maybe Bear Stearns was the one that they let collapse, and they let Morgan Stanley and Goldman Sachs buy up their assets, and all the rich guys got richer, and all the poor people, the politically unconnected poor people, took it up in the shorts, if you know what I mean. And the cool thing was that Ron Paul had been kind of describing what was wrong and what was going to happen, and he was proven right very shortly thereafter. Well, the general gist of the hard money camp and the Austrian economists is that when you create too much money, or when you debase money, then you cause bubbles, and you cause misallocations of capital that will be accounted for at some point. Whether if you prolong it, if you make it last longer and you print more money, you're able to get away with it for longer, then the inevitable crash will be that much worse. And so what logically follows from that is that you go to the money that's been used for 5,000 years that always accounts for irresponsible fiat money printing, which is gold and silver, and they have to rise in proportion to account for all the excess dollars that have been created. This is a very broad brush overview, so hope you're still with me and getting something out of this. There's a point to this whole story. And what happens is, so my newfound excitement and passion learning Austrian economics, I started buying some gold and silver, and I just sitting on that golden egg. Boy, I was going to get rich soon. and it did. It went up and then it crashed. Gold and silver kind of crashed with the general markets, but they started quickly to rebound. In 2010 and ultimately 11 went way up. But I was making a fair bit of cash on the track, and saved up several $1,000s. And looking back, if I'd have put that into the stock market and never touched it, I'd be materially in dollar terms a lot wealthier today, and just kept shooting horses and not thought about it. And if I didn't know anything and all I did was park my money at some mainstream financial planner, shoot, I'm not saying I'd be retired by now, but I would for sure be in a different financial situation. But that's neither here nor there. I don't regret that at all. That's one of the, if you go down this road and start learning economics and you start thinking about it, then you got to be real aware of your own psychology and learn how not get bogged down. And a lot of Austrians get bogged down, or people in this hard money camp, it's easy to get bogged down and miss out on opportunities because you understand the underlying problems and you think that the correction that's inevitably coming is coming sooner than it does. And it's easy to underestimate the power of the central banks and the government to prolong the bubble, which they have done an amazing job at so far. So we're really, everything they did in 2009 was basically just pumping more fake, newly created money into to reinflate the stock market, and by extension, a lot of people's pensions and 401ks, and so. All that being said, I wish I could have said that in about 5 minutes, so I didn't lose majority of the audience. But if you're with me this far, then now comes the part about the horse market. But I saw firsthand how, I was shooting some race horses, and I was shooting a lot of cheap ones, but also my main outfit, they were buying some pretty good horses, and I believe it was 2009, right after the crash, and there wasn't a lot of money and credit flowing around for the big shots. These guys I worked for went to I think the Keeneland sale, which is a real prestigious racehorse sale in Kentucky, and there were the horses there that in the previous years would have sold for 40, 50, 60,000 for these 2-year-olds in training, maybe, or 30,000, 40,000 would have been a couple years earlier. They were going for pennies on the dollar because the normal clientele that buys that grade of horse, they were not as flush at the moment, with the stock market crash and the general tightness in bank credit. And so, they bought some horses, some really nice horses for, $3,500 or $5,000, and my dumb ass was thinking that, I was buying some gold coins and silver, which I was thinking that I was going to do real good, and I did for a while, but I thought that whatever the government was doing in the central bank was doing to reflate the bubble, there was no way that it was going to work. They wouldn't be able to pump everything back up because it had been so long. I mean, the U.S. dollar had already been several decades since the 70s when Nixon cut the final ties to the price of gold, or dollar convertibility for sovereign nations. And so I just didn't see how, well, really, I underestimated how powerful the financial powers that be were in reflating that bubble and pumping the stock market back up and keeping the whole party going to fight another day, so to speak. And those guys I was working for, some of those horses, I remember one of them, she won a maiden allowance and then a non-2 allowance in pretty good fashion, and they were getting calls from California offering $160,000 or $200,000 for this filly that they just bought the year before for, I think, $3,500. So that's how it can work in a in a volatile market. It's really artificially volatile based on the interventions that the government and central banks are that they're engaged in anyway. So I saw that happen, and I saw gold and silver did run up, and they ran up into 2011, and I had a fair bit saved up, and by this time I was back in Arkansas, and at one point 2011 silver screamed up and hit almost $50, and when I'd been buying it at $11, $6, $7, $8, $11, $14, and boy, I thought the poor days were over. And I wasn't really thinking in terms of saving wealth, building wealth. I didn't know exactly what was going to happen, but I had much higher price targets in mind for silver and gold, and I still do, 10 years later. And the silver kind of squeezed there and went up $15 in the last couple weeks or week or something, and basically what happened was that the market makers, who have for so long controlled the price by issuing paper contracts that they didn't ever have to deliver, they almost got broken in 2011. So somehow they got out of that, and that's a long story, and I'm not going into that. But when silver crashed from 50 down to 30 something, and then kind of dwindled down over the next few years, I basically reevaluated my life and realized that I was thinking too short term, and I was kind of just living to wait on a speculation and think that I'd be rich at some point instead of kind of creating value in my own life over time. And so basically I started selling, and I started not shoeing as many horses over the next couple years. Not that I was still going strong, and probably 2015 was one of my bigger years, but my heart was kind of not in it. I started doing things that I thought would create value in my own life. So some would say that's your career, and be that as it may, I went to horseshoeing school on a whim, and I got pretty good at it, and I'm still getting good at it, even though I'm not doing that many now. But I had the thought, I think this was around 2011, 12, after this big silver run, I thought, if silver went to $600, which I think is not outside the realm of possibility, and I had, you know, a bunch stacked up, what would I do? What if I had $1 million laying around? Or, you know, just hypothetically, what if I won the lottery and I was wealthy past what I could ever spend? What would I do other than just sit around and go do like all the other people that win the lottery? And that's when I realized I had to start practicing. Really, I didn't know it at the time, but practicing virtue in the way I lived and the things that I did. I thought, what would you do if you were rich? And the two things that I had always wanted to do were, you know, related to horses. I wanted to ride broncs and rope, and then I've always played music. So I said, I mean, I kind of had in mind that if I was wealthy, the things that I could do that are not available at a monetary price are, you know, getting good or being a good roper or a good musician. So I started kind of focusing on those two things, and at the time I was still in my 20s, and I started way too late to try to ride broncs, saddle broncs, and that's a whole nother series of videos. I could talk about that. And while I never was successful at that led me on a path to a lot of self-improvement and, you know, learning how to breathe under pressure, and it made me a better horse shoer for one, and it made me kind of opened up a lot of things that I've ended up. It opened up a lot of ways of thinking and made me learn some things that have helped me immensely in my life so far. So I don't regret that, even though I wish I'd started earlier and believed in myself a little bit more, and, you know, gone about it the right way when I was 18 or 19 instead of when I was 26 or 27. And so when I quit trying to ride broncs there a couple years later and just focused exclusively learning to rope and playing music. And I'm gonna tell you, I've had a lot of fun over the last several years, and I've driven 5 hours to play a gig on the fiddle that, you know, that paid $50 or $100, and I've never really thought of it. I just always thought about it like a challenge to myself to get better and to enjoy and to do what I love, and to do it like I had no concern for money. And, you know, that's a kind of a big gamble that remains to be seen if it'll pay off in the long run. To me, it's already paid off, you know, hundredfold, but not necessarily financially. But that's something that I've had to think about a lot, and I can talk about that forever. So I'm just going to keep going on with my original subject of whether or not the horse market is in a bubble. So those guys bought that horse in 2009, you know, for $3,500, and ended up selling it for a lot of money, or I don't remember how much they sold it for. Or they made a lot of money with that horse, you know, that she was a runner. And so that was 2010, 11, 12. I'm watching the price of horses go back up, and watching people buying these horses, you know, yearlings, and thinking, oh man, it's going to crash before purse money's going to be down. You know, me always thinking that the next round of quantitative easing or whatever it was the government pulled out of their ass, it just wasn't going to work this time. And honestly, it shouldn't have, but it did. So here we are, and it's not just me. I mean, there are a lot of professionals that I followed that did not expect this to go on as long as it has. So I don't feel too bad about myself, and like I'm not wishing that I'd bought horses back then or whatever. But I'm just kind of watching this all from a distance as I'm shoeing, and I'm still shooting on the track pretty full time throughout, really up till about a year ago, but really hardcore there for a few years. You know, we were traveling, and there for a while I was doing, I don't know, maybe I got up to 100 horses a month. which may not seem like that much if you're one of the guys that's always doing 10, 12 head a day and bragging about it, but for me, that's all I wanted. So for a kid, you know, that's 27 years old, married, no kids, that's pretty dang good money. So while I was doing that, I was really focused though. I really eased off of that and put a lot of time and a lot of my energy into learning to rope, and it was a long, slow process, I can tell you. And there's some videos that I made a couple years ago about it that are pretty painful to watch going back now, but I'm glad they're there as a record of how much progress I've made. But so roping and playing music, I've off and on, you know, played with a couple different guys in, you know, different band or two, and worked on my own guitar playing and singing, and I'm kind of have reached some breakthroughs recently where I've kind of getting the confidence where I'm going to finish some songs I've written and get out there and start playing more. But in that time, I've watched, now I'm getting off on a tangent about playing music, but and since watching the racehorses and then getting deeper into roping and buying last couple of years, buying some young green horses and starting to rope on them, I've watched some of the crazy stuff. If you follow it all, if you're in the roping world at all, you've seen the horses sold in Arizona early this spring, I think it was, for $250,000 for a gelding that Trevor Brazile and Miles Baker trained, which is awesome for them. This is not to take anything away from how great a horse they made or anyone else that's selling horses for big money. When they're selling that big, you're buying the cream. But at the same time, it's hard to buy just a started gelding 4 or 5 year old for. I mean, you're gonna have to spend $7,000 or $8,000 to buy anything really decent, and that's not the case here 5-6 years ago. I bet you that's doubles. You know, I bet you 5 or 6 years ago you could probably buy, you know, a 4 or 5 year old gelding with some pretty good papers that been ridden for 30 to 60 days. You could probably buy one for $3,500, $4,000, and probably cheaper. Though I wasn't really in the market as much then, but nowadays that horse, I mean, you might get 8, 10 more for it, and based on the fact that, you know, you make a good finished rope horse and you know, haul him a little bit, and you know, you might take him to sale and you might get 18, or you might get 12 depending on the sale, but you might get 25, and you might get 30, or if you have an established name in the business, you know, if you're Trevor Brazile, you might get 75 or 100. So there's so much demand for those good geldings, and I don't have my finger in it as deep as a lot of you know, I'm not in the horse sales all the time, so I'm not saying this from a place of knowing everything about it, but just from what I've watched on, you know, horses for sale on Facebook, and watched some of the sale results, and from what I've priced horses that, you know, people I know are, you know, since I've been trying to buy some over the last couple of years, I've kind of been paying a lot more attention, and it's kind of reminding me a little bit of the way it was in the racehorse business right before it crashed in 2008 and 9. I mean, someone paying $250,000 for a finished rope horse, that's awesome for the guys that made them. But just in general, that's what they call in a market. You know, like when you're getting near a top, it gets a little frothy. And maybe I'm still early. I've been early for 10 years. Maybe I'm still early, and that's where it's going to be a tricky thing over the next few months for me hopefully sell a horse or two. But you know, if this market cracks, the stock market cracks, and you know, drops 40% again in the next few weeks to months to year or two, which I think is eminently possible with all the money printing and economic distortion that's gone on, especially over the last 2 years, on top of all of the money printing that was done since the great financial crisis of 2008, then, you know, there's not going to be a lot of big bidders for finished rope horses, just like there were no bidders at that Keeneland sale in 2009. Horses that should have gone for 40 or 50,000 and were going for 5,000, or so that's a big drop. And so this is just something I'm kicking around in my head. I don't know if I think horses are in a bubble to some extent, just like everything else is, you know, just like the stock market's in a bubble. A lot of real estate is, even though it's hotter in some areas because you have a lot of people, for good reason, fleeing blue states, going to states that are a lot freer. So I don't blame them there, but that's bidding up a lot of the real estate. And you've had interest rates, the cost of borrowing money has been so low for so long that it's like people are getting out of touch with any type of return. You know, it's like the problem with the housing market was that people were buying and flipping houses, and they were making 30% in a year, and thinking this would go on forever. And so they would make 30%, and they would lever that and to buy 4 more houses. It's where you literally had people in Las Vegas, women that worked as a escort or a stripper, you know, that owned 6 houses, and they were flipping them. They're house flippers, and they were making just piles of money there for a while. And that was all based on the fact that interest rates had been so low for 5 or 6 years since the dot-com crash. Anyway, this could go on forever and ever and ever, and I'm going to bring this video to an end here pretty soon. But the whole point is that when this market crashes, when and not if, that's going to take a lot of wind out of the sails on some of these big horse sales, and by extension, I don't know how it will affect the rope horse and rodeo horse market, but you know, I hear a lot of people saying, you know, I don't hear a lot of people looking at it from this angle. And no, people always forget the last one, you know, the last crash, and they say the demand is just so high now because there's so many new people getting in, and that may be true, and that's great to the extent that that's what's driving prices, you know, these high prices for horses. And I say all this, and I feel like I'm talking down the sale on my horses, and I could be wrong, and you know, I might sell mine too low in 2 months. You know, I got one that I'd like to sell. Well, if I rope on him steady for 3 months here in Arizona, and he gets better and better as he's doing, you know, in this market, he might be worth 30,000, depending on, you know, I get the right. Well, that could be optimistic on my part, but really, if Trevor Brazile had him, he'd be worth 40 or 50. You know, I mean, now if I have him, maybe he's worth 25. Well, I might think that this market can't last that long, and I might sell him for 20. Somebody that can go use him for a year and know that he's going to make him better than I had him, because he's a 6 header, and you know, maybe he's a little handier than I am. So, well, hell, you're winning on him with a 3 card, and hell, I can take this horse and go win here and there, and maybe need a rodeo horse or whatever. That guy might know that he might not think that the horse market is going to bubble, and he might be right. And so he might middle me for 20,000. He might take that horse a year later. Trevor Brazile might have just sold a horse for 340,000, and it might cost 35 to buy a run-of-the-mill old man's horse that can win at your local, you know, 8-point jackpot. So this whole market timing thing is a funny thing, and it's something that, to me, it's like it's kind of a fun game to play in your head, and you're really playing against yourself to understand what your risk tolerance is, and it's a two-edged sword, because if I hadn't thought about all this, if I didn't start reading economics books and reading Henry Hazlitt and Murray Rothbard and Bill Bonner, in 2007, so that's almost 15 years ago, I might have just, all that money I was making on the track, I might have had that just in an IRA somewhere, going up with the S&P and letting the government pump it up for 15 years, and I might be retired. So, but at the same time, I'd rather play it on my terms and invest in what I believe in and do the things that I care about. So it's not really all about money. It's more about just making your way and doing the things you love to do. And that's what his channel really is about, is inspiring people to go about, to learn some basic economics, to where you can understand and not be just kind of a passenger or a leaf floating along the river. You can maybe actually get in front of this crash that's coming, and if you own part of your assets, or just buy a little bit of gold and silver, and because there's going to be a big repricing there, and maybe understand and be positioned to take advantage of what's coming, instead of getting wiped out like so many did last time, and so many will. I want more people in the so-called Western industry, in the roping world, and I want more people to be elevated and to come through this crash than, and with the new monetary system, which is going to have to happen, or whatever the new Bretton Woods, it'll have to happen in order to gain some semblance of trust in whatever, in dollars or whatever the global currency is in use at the time, that will come about after this so-called Great Reset. Anyway, I could go on in this for hours and hours, and really I'd be well served if I could say this 37-minute video in about 10 minutes. So I got to work on my elevator pitch. So that's a good reason for me to be doing this video challenge, so I can kind of hone down my message and make it more palatable. Now, if you watch it this far, then you might be a true believer already, and I hope you'll subscribe to my channel and see what I got tomorrow. Maybe it'll be a 4-minute video about getting back to Arizona, or hell, I might talk about some other random thing, but I promise this is going to happen this time. For the next few months, I'm going to flesh these out and interview some cool people about making a living, creating value, understanding sound money, and also where that connects with liberty, and where that connects with the beef industry, anyone that connects with being healthy and not relying on centralized systems that have gone haywire for all the world to see over the last 2 years. And I'm going to get this all distilled down to where it's going to be a neat package, and I'm excited to find some people that share these interests, and that I can talk to, and stay up late, eat steak, and drink a little whiskey, play some music. One of these days I'll scrape together a few people that think like I do, and we'll have a party. So if you've been here this long, thanks for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will talk to you tomorrow. Adios.